When a clinical trial is done and a prestigious medical lab team releases a report or anything like that, from heart drugs to cold medicine, Dr. James McCormack asks pointed questions about the results. He is a pharmacist who blogs and podcasts. He is a UBC professor in the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences. He is considered a myth buster of drug therapy. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. James McCormack to Studio 4 to tell us more, if I can say it. And you work along with Dr. Michael Allen, who's a general practitioner.
Yes, yeah. We do a podcast where we try and get the information out about clinical trials, because one of the key things is that, there's hundreds of trials, and how should physicians think about looking at them, and how should pharmacists look about them, and so that's kind of what we do.
And so when you look at a report, what's your litmus test? What questions do you ask? I know you're a natural-born skeptic.
Yes, I am.
Suspecting.
Yes, but not a cynic. Because that kind of gets boring. So what I typically do when I'm looking at a clinical trial, I'll read the conclusion, and I'll assume that's the best it could possibly be. And if the conclusion would not make me change what I do in practice, then that's the end of looking at the clinical trial.
Right.
But if it says something that would make me go, maybe I should do this differently with my patients or whatever it is, then I look at it in more detail. And more often than not, the results really don't support the conclusion, at least to the degree that it's being represented. So
you would ask a question like, who funded this?
Yeah.
Why did they do this study? Is it the disease of the moment?
Yeah. Not so much, it's really to look at what were the actual results, because most clinical trials are well done. Studies that are done by the drug companies are actually some of the best designed clinical trials. It's all about how the information is presented and how to think about it. And it almost always comes down to numbers, especially when we're talking about things like high blood pressure and cholesterol and diabetes, because we can't prevent death, period. I mean, we can.
Pretty much going to happen.
We're figuring. I'm working on something. I'm working on something right now, but I can't talk about it. But so it's all about a numbers game. And the concerns that I have when we're talking about these sorts of things is we scare people, and we scare people by calling things the silent killer, or if you have osteoporosis, it's a silent thief. What I find and what I think patients really need is to know, if I do nothing, what would happen? And then if I take a treatment, what would happen? And often the benefits, if you talk about it that way, are not nearly as big as you'd expect.
Okay, and what are the side effects of the treatment?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you go to your doctor, you get your blood results,
Right.
Your doctor sits down with you and gives you the numbers.
Right.
The cholesterol numbers, the thyroid, what your thyroid's doing, all of that. So as a patient, you're suggesting I respond and say,
what I would say is, okay, what is my risk? Because it's not all about treating your numbers. I mean, the only reason you're worried about your numbers is because someone said you should worry about your numbers.
Sure.
So what you really want to know is, what is my chance of developing cardiovascular disease?
Because my cholesterol is such and such.
Exactly, yeah. And so what you want to do is go, if I have a particular risk factor, whether it be cholesterol or blood pressure or glucose or whatever it is, diabetes, how does that increase my chance? And so the discussion I think that should be going on is, and the way I do it when I'm talking to patients, if you had an identical twin sitting next to you, and their blood pressure was 160 over 100, and yours is, let's say, 130 over 80.
Right.
The difference in the chance of your twin having a heart attack or a stroke in the next 5 to 10 years is probably about 2% higher.
And that's not a big percentage.
Well, it's 2%.
It's 2%.
So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you consider that big or small. And
if you said 50, I'd say, gee, better look at the blood pressure.
Right, but 50% is, and where you hear numbers like, if you reduce blood pressure, you can lower your chance of stroke by 50% or 40%. Where that comes from are clinical trials. When you do a study long term, what you do is you give people either placebo or no treatment, or you give them a drug. And if you do that in high blood pressure, for instance, if you study them for 5 years, in the patients who who get no treatment, their chance of a cardiovascular event in the next sort of 5 to 10 years might be 8%. If I treat you and lower your blood pressure, it'll go down to 6. Now you'll hear that that's a sort of a 25% reduction in the chance of cardiovascular disease, because 6 is 25% less than 8.
Yes.
But really the difference is 8 versus 6. And so the bottom line is you have about a 2% chance of benefiting over the next 5 to 10 years. And then if that's the case, you, not your doctor, you need to make a decision about whether it's worth it.
So if you're not a math genius.
Yeah, well, yeah. Although it's great, I mean, it literally is sort of grade 3 math. You know,
Right.
it's 8 down to 6, so 2% difference. And if that's
Sure.
important to you, that's brilliant. And if it's not, that's absolutely brilliant too.
Well, medical heretics will tell you things like, don't believe the HRT. Let's go to
Yes.
menopause
Yes,
for a minute,
yes.
because we went through that dance. Women were
Right.
throwing their estrogen pills into
Right.
the garbage because all the tests said you needed it. And there
Right.
were women who said, I don't need it. My estrogen is fine. I'm getting lots of estrogen, but nobody gave me a test. And you're thinking, well, am I being irresponsible if I'm not like popping up the progesterone?
Yeah.
Or what?
Yeah, well, we kind of screwed that one up. And it's because we used the wrong type of studies to look at the benefit/harm of hormone replacement.
Right.
Once we did the properly designed clinical trials to look at, does it actually improve outcomes?
Right.
But we found out that it doesn't. However, in contrast, but you have to remember that it's also using hormone replacement is really some of the best stuff that we have for menopausal symptoms. And it also wasn't nearly as bad as what it's being made out to be. If you look at the clinical trials for HRT, when we properly did them, there was about a 1% absolute increase in the chance of bad things happening.
Sure.
Now that's not good because you're
No.
taking them to reduce things, and it didn't. So the decision, if I was having a conversation with you about this, if you were having menopausal symptoms, although I know you're only 27 or 28.
Yes, I'm only 27.
Yes, but if you were, we'd say, okay, there is about a 1% increase in bad things happening, like strokes or cancer or whatever. However, if your symptoms are debilitating, maybe we can treat you well. There's always a risk of everything,
That's
right?
a lifestyle thing.
Yeah.
If I'm sweating at a meeting
Yeah.
and I don't want to, maybe I need some kind of hormone replacement, but then I have options. I can go bioidentical, I can change what I eat, I can take something alternative off the shelf of the health food store. There's so many options.
Yeah, well, except, although you mentioned bioidentical, I mean, the problems that we have right now with bioidentical is we have the exact same research base, in fact, even less than what we had with sort of the Premerins and that type of stuff. So we actually don't know, based on properly designed trials, whether or not bioidentical hormones are really the panacea by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, so at the what you call TEC, the Therapeutics Education Collaboration, is what you do is, for instance, let's talk about the David Baines issue, because I know you work with David.
Yes,
He's a friend of mine and an
Oh,
incredible reporter.
Most thorough reporter I've ever met.
Yes, so you were doing the cold FX with him, or doing some research for him. Tell me that story.
Well, we play hockey together, so that's where that came.
That's good.
That's where that came from. And so what it was, you know, there's many claims about many different medications, and cold FX, you know, has a huge amount of press.
Sure,
and so
Don Cherry endorsed it. And
well, there you go, and you know what a great scientist he is.
He's a hockey guy.
I know. But so the question was, it's great to have all the claims, but what we do, and what my colleague Mike Allen and myself do, is we look at the clinical trials to see if they support it. Now, the great thing about the Cold FX group is that they did the clinical trials to look to see if it actually has a benefit. The problem is though, when you actually look at the clinical trials, if you read the conclusion, it says it works. But if you actually go look at the numbers and how they've interpreted it, it really doesn't do much at all, if anything. And so it's so crucial that, that there are people out there that are really looking at the numbers and the things and try to put it into context. So that's what we do to do that. And so now the tricky thing with cold FX is you'll have people swear by it.
Yes.
And the reason they swear by it is because almost all colds get better. And so the vast majority of people who take it, even if it had no benefit at all, would say, oh, it clearly worked.